Welcome to ESL Challenges and Strategies in Non-ESL Classrooms by Daniel Alfrey, Amanda Guerrera, and Liz Vosgarichin. We will be focusing on students learning English as a second language in Quebec's education today. This can include a variety of students such as international, students of immigrant families, and also third language learners. It goes without saying that these students of English as a second language learners still need to learn non-language subjects in a language they have little to no knowledge of. What does it mean to be an ESL student? ESL students are required not only to learn a new language, but adapt to a new culture, learn about new histories, face new challenges, and conform to the Quebec government's education system. ESL students encounter a number of challenges outside of the language classroom, the main challenge being that they are required to learn subject-specific material in a language that is unfamiliar to them. Other challenges that they may encounter is that of a non-language teacher who is untrained in ESL teaching methods. The students are faced with lack of tools that would enhance their learning, the inability to communicate due to language barriers, which makes understanding the content difficult, and these barriers make explaining their lack of comprehension a challenge. Non-language classrooms occur fewer times in a week, which offers only a limited amount of learning environment where the student is using the subject-specific language. And finally, ESL students must put in double the effort into their work, and it takes double, if not more, time to learn and complete the work assigned. Teachers in non-ESL classrooms also face challenges. These include covering all the government-required curricula, ensuring student comprehension of the material through regular formative assessment, encourage ESL students to participate in class, and create a safe space for which they can speak up rather than avoiding to answer questions or asking for help. The need for classroom modifications and adaptations for ESL students, which also means altering and adding to worksheets or presentations, and of course the lack of resources and tools that teachers have in order to help enhance and support ESL student learning. The focus of this presentation is to raise awareness of ESL students in non-ESL classrooms in order for teachers to create an inclusive classroom, to explore specific subject areas such as science, math, and social sciences, to suggest strategies for non-ESL teachers to support ESL students, and to offer general strategies with a wider range of application.
Hi, this is Daniel, ESL in Math and Science classes. Within the Mathematics, Science and Technology program, the Quebec Education Plan expects students to develop systematic observation skills, critical thinking, and effective experimentation abilities in order to represent and understand the world they live in. This presents two types of language challenges for the students. First, teachers must use situation-based pedagogy, which usually requires extensive use of language to create a realistic and meaningful context for the scientific or mathematical knowledge or skill of interest. In addition to requiring higher language skills to access knowledge in these classes, students have to employ similar level of language skills to demonstrate their level of competency during assessments. These students have to use language skillfully to interpret information, describe phenomenon, and any methodological decision made. In addition to the subject-specific competencies, science and math teachers must contribute to developing the 9 cross-curricular competencies. The communication-related group of competencies especially requires special attention to both subject-specific and general academic languages. Consequently, the QEP calls for all teachers to be language teachers. Now, do most math and science teachers contribute adequately to developing students' communication competency? When teaching in a language that students have mastered, underestimating the language requirement for effective communication in the classroom may be inconsequential. However, research has shown that lack of fluency in the language of instruction prevents effective learning. John Clegg, among others, asserts that English language learners can have better success in non-language courses if teachers provide language support whenever the demands their lessons make on the language ability of their students exceed those abilities. The specific ways that language is used by students to participate in learning is what has been termed language demands. For English language learners or L2 learners, the language demands can exhaust cognitive resources. This happens when students have to divide cognitive resources between language demands and subject-specific content demands. To prevent such high multitasking, teachers must provide language support. During the lesson planning stage of any lesson, the teacher must determine the language skills that students will need to fully participate in the lesson. List these down and find strategies or tools you can use to support students or minimize the cognitive demand on students. Here is an example for a lesson on melting in elementary school. The vocabulary, functions, and skills of language are outlined in order to provide support. When learners have to make a prediction, the teacher anticipates a higher language demand on the students and has developed a substitution table to support them. The substitution table shows many possibilities, the sentence structure, and the vocabulary required to make a prediction. This allows more cognitive effort to be afforded to scientific or mathematical reasoning. Similar in function to substitution tables are writing frames. They can support language demands on students with underdeveloped language skills by offering the possible ways to present their ideas in an ordered fashion, as well as the essential terms to be used in the context. Multiple representations of the same information does help with learning. For L2 students, graphs, tables, and concept maps for presenting information or assessing students' knowledge can be very effective. These representations provide a relatively high amount of information considering the number of words employed. For example, a teacher can present this simplified concept map to show all the possibilities and processes involved in solving for an unknown in an absolute value function instead of a detailed text conveying the same message. Other effective strategies include using real-life situations that students are familiar with, cutting long sentences into short pieces so that the use of short sentences will require less cognitive effort. Having a vocabulary list for every topic that can be easily accessed by the student. Thinking out loud while solving a problem in front of the class. Use lesson capture to give students the opportunity to watch a video representation of the lesson at their own pace in their own time. Another effective approach is to group underdeveloped students with strong students who can provide another level of language support. Most importantly, practice effective wait time. Allowing students sufficient time to process information and refine their thoughts before asking questions or providing answers.
So as we come to ESL Challenges in Social Science, which in Quebec covers history, geography, contemporary world and financial education, to make this more practical, we've chosen to focus on the history of Quebec and Canada, a program taught in Cycle 2 with grade 9 and grade 10, but most of these strategies can be adapted for use elsewhere in other social science programs. The three aims of the program are to acquire knowledge of the history of Quebec and Canada, develop the intellectual skills associated with the study of history, develop the critical thinking and discussion skills conducive to social participation. And it's this final aim which is at the heart of all of the social science programs, in that students are being prepared for life beyond school, which the government emphasizes includes social participation. And of course, language would be a key aspect of being able to participate in that way. And so it's with these three aims in mind that the program plays out. There are two competencies. Firstly, students will characterize a period in the history of Quebec and Canada, and secondly, interpret a social phenomenon. what these imply for ESL students are that students are in contact with a significant amount of information. Characterizing involves identifying the distinctive features of the period and describing them. Interpreting a social phenomenon demands a critical assessment of the phenomena according to the angle suggested by the word used to describe it, which we'll see is especially challenging for ESL students. To explore identifying distinctive features, this demands knowledge of historical events situated in time and space, also linguistic knowledge to describe events and features and the relationship within a larger context, and both of these are significant demands which place ESL students at a disadvantage unless they are well supported by the teacher. The critical assessment part of the course is also very challenging, as students need to understand the angles suggested by the wording used, and this demands a sophisticated understanding of the nuance of language, which is very challenging even for native speakers. The day-to-day challenges for students in the classroom include large amounts of subject-specific vocabulary, a lot of which is new concepts that students have not met before, and the cognitive demands of language reduce the cognitive availability for content. And so we need to think carefully about how that actually is accounted for to accommodate ESL students. And students are also expected to be comfortable working with documents written in Old English, which can be a challenge. The government exam in grade 10 also provides significant obstacles for ESL students. The marking scheme is very rigid. No marks are given for alternative wordings of keyword meanings. Students need to interpret documents, including those with Old English, which, as they have to do this independently, is particularly difficult. And the final question is a 150-word essay, which, although it is scaffolded, often is a skill that teachers neglect to practice sufficiently, as it's left to the final few months before the exam to really practice that. What are the ways forward for a history teacher? Well, as Daniel mentioned, language demand analysis in every lesson plan becomes necessary, and what teachers want students to say, to read, and to write in a lesson, and what resources will bridge the gap between the language demand and the language ability of the ESL students. They must also teach key words, must explicitly teach the school language and the academic language and forms that that language is used in. They must also explicitly teach the thinking skills which are required for history, which are analysing, describing, narrating, and classifying, and the forms of words used to express them. The language of history, which Steve Cook identifies in 2009, where he groups into 5 groups different types of language, which helps teachers and students feel it's more manageable to master these skills and to practice using them in the history context. Here are another 2 groups: communicate the notion of cause and effect, and express inferences and relate them to evidence. And these groups become the building blocks for the language of history, which ESL students need to master. So these are really useful things to put up on the wall and have highly visible throughout the course of the program. In order to support students' written production, again, the use of substitution exercises that we saw earlier, and even though they were criticised as part of the audio-linguistic style of ESL teaching for being impractical, in this context they are incredibly useful. As for dealing with documents in Old English, like the one shown, traffic light highlighters to indicate parts that are understood, partially understood, or not understood at all are really helpful visuals to help students process these things. So over the course of a year, this should improve as they get used to sentence structure and also words like thee, thou, and hence. It's also possible to do modern rewrites in pairs and groups, which has the advantage of encouraging students to process the information for themselves. Political cartoons offer good visuals to historical contexts and events, but often need explanation and discussion, as some of them are culturally specific and not readily accessible to all students. Finally, one of the most challenging aspects in critical assessments needs to be taught explicitly, and ideally ESL students see this from both sides, as a reader but also as an author. And so one way is to look at newspapers reporting the same event, ideally in the past, but if necessary it could be done with contemporary newspapers, but also to ask students to create articles themselves given a specific angle and to understand what elements of language they need to use to effectively present this angle. You could also use role plays as an oral way of actually offering students to begin to do this with the tools of language and how it presents a particular narrative.
The following section will review general strategies to help non-language teachers support their ESL students in subject-specific classes. The key to ensuring understanding is accessibility. The use of language should be simplified, the use of images to link ideas and words to pictures and representations, the use of technology within the classroom, and of course, teacher availability and the classroom environment created are all elements that enhance accessibility for ESL students. Language is the main challenge ESL students face. Therefore, it is important for non-language teachers to use and emphasize keywords, to simplify terms during introductions, which will help connect the keywords to the core material, to explain and demonstrate through visuals and not only depend on language, to model the material through the use of the keywords and terms, to make connections to the students' prior knowledge and the new language of the curricula in order to reduce the learning gap of the ESL students. Visual stimulation is a great way to ensure that students receive multiple forms of the information. The use of flashcards can enhance studying and revision. Posters around the classroom are a quick way to refer to specific terms. Handouts and activities which include images and keywords can help ESL students activate visual memory. And reference sheets and charts can be a great demonstration of various meanings. For example, the math symbols in this chart list the many possibilities for each keyword. All these tools are easily created or available online and can benefit ESL students. ESL students can benefit greatly from the use of technology within a classroom. Mobile devices such as cell phones, computers, and tablets allow them to access translation programs that can help them communicate their understanding better. Audiovisual tools can help students visualize the language of the core material. Using creative tools will help motivate students who are learning content in a second language. This will also facilitate the communication and comprehension input and output of ESL students. These creative tools and devices, in conjunction with the translation programs, will help students feel more comfortable in expressing themselves. These tools help reduce student anxiety and builds student self-confidence when it comes time for them to speak in their new language. Teacher availability is key to creating a safe environment for an ESL student. It requires a teacher to put in extra time, extra work, and extra dedication to ensuring that the material that they are presenting is something that an ESL student can benefit from. Also, being available, being patient, and be ready to answer questions that ESL students may have is a crucial element to helping them learn. Offering tutorials and simplified activities, also easier learning tools, can make sure that a student knows that you are really doing your best to help them learn. It is important as a teacher of a non-language class, but still of ESL students, to be understanding, open-minded, and of course supportive of their learning difficulties. Teachers should explain and model subject-specific information in order to really help the students grasp the concepts, not only the language. And of course, teachers should use all resources available that can help their ESL students learn within the classroom. Again, this can be done through formative assessment on a regular basis, just to see where it is that the gaps are and what more you need to focus on. In summary, non-language teachers and ESL students are faced with language-related challenges in subject-specific classrooms. It is important that teachers be aware of the difficulties ESL students may have and be prepared through the use of the strategies presented to support and enhance ESL student learning. Language demand analysis must be an intrinsic part of the lesson planning. These considerations benefit all learners, even fluent first language students, but especially those with weak literacy. Therefore, they are a good return on investment for teachers who are willing to put in some extra time.